Okay, so we have a couple people here, I think. So it's 12:30. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining another one of these brief Teams talks. Today, I'm going to be talking about just copyright basics. I've shared some information with faculty in the past on just a fair use checklist that we have access to that I've learned about from a certificate course I went through. But the Jerry Falwell Library has actually built some pages from LibGuides just about copyright basics and what they mean for your lectures, for content you're sharing, and it's really useful. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. But I want to share some of those resources and some other things I can show you when you're considering using images or any copyrighted material. I get those questions a lot from faculty, especially about using copyrighted images. So to begin with, I always try to show where you can find these things. If you go to the LUCOM library page at liberty.edu/lucom/library, and you scroll down, you're probably familiar with LUCOM library resources, Jerry Falwell library resources, and its databases. So the main thing I want to show today is the Jerry Falwell library resource um, on copyright policy, and that'll actually take you to a LibGuide they've built. And there's a lot of information here. There's basic information about what copyright is, how it applies, how long it's in effect for different pieces of work, what the implications are for in-person instruction, or they call face-to-face teaching, what's required for distance. So if you're doing things online, there's something called the TEACH Act, which includes, which was basically developed for distance education, doing things online remotely. But so you don't have to know all this stuff, but there's just information about what the history of what copyright is and how it applies. There's tabs for copyright for students and copyright for faculty. I think for our purposes, since student doctors are considered professional students, they would probably use the things that were the guidelines that are found under the copyright for faculty. I think this copyright for students might be more applicable to undergrad students, so I would encourage our student doctors that were considering using something for publication to follow the guidelines in the copyright for faculty. But when you open this tab, you'll see it's got there's more information about copyright management. There's links to what's called a Creative Commons license, what's within the public domain. Public domain is just after a certain period of time, things are no longer protected by copyright. You're free to use however you want, and it's like the life of the creator plus 70 years and one after that point. So you're talking about things that are pretty old that are in the public domain, but there are current things available in Creative Commons, or even things that are available for commercial use, but you probably will have to get permission. And also most likely pay a fee to use those things. But if you ever have questions about what the requirements are for your face-to-face, your residential instruction you're doing here, it's got information about that. There's a link to a fair use checklist, and I've talked to faculty about this before. If something falls within fair use, you're able to use it without getting a permission from the creator. You just have to make attribution and make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the fair use checklist. Some of you may know in the LUCOM library guide that I built, I have a fair use checklist that's based on one that was developed by Columbia University, and basically it's just a metric that you go through and decide, what am I using this item, whatever it is. If it's, say it's an image, an X-ray or something, am I using it for teaching? Is it commercial? Is it for scholarship? And basically you go through this checklist, and if you have most of your check marks over here on this left side for purpose, nature, amount, and effect, then chances are, I think a lot of times faculty want a hard yes or no, when really it's kind of a gauging whether or not it typically leans towards fair use, favoring fair use or not, fair educational use. So that's the one that's on our LibGuide that I've shared with faculty before. In this JFL guide, they've got a link to another fair use checklist that they've kind of made specifically about Liberty. But if you read it, it's basically the same thing. It considers the purpose of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount. So like how much content is it a whole chapter or something, or is it a portion? and the effect of the use upon the potential market for the value of the work used. It's considering the same things. And if you scroll down here, you'll see it's actually got a form, but these are basically the same things that are in the fair use checklist. We have linked on the LibGuide, and you can feel free to use either one of these. The TEACH Act is, I'm not as familiar with this, but there are specific legislation that deals with copyright when dealing with a digital environment. So things we're doing remotely, if you're a faculty member and you're doing something with students in their 3rd and 4th year that are at a distance site, the rotation site somewhere else in the country, these are things that might apply to using content in that way. One of the things that's kind of universal is however you're using content, when possible, it's best to link to the content instead of putting like a file of an image. If you can link to that image, sometimes that's just better. And also something that's kind of universal is if the material that you're using is on like a PowerPoint that's on Canvas, it's behind that single sign-on, so you're not unintentionally giving access to everyone in the world to this image or this file or this chapter, whatever, but only to our students who have single sign-on access to that Canvas platform, and they're the only ones really that will be able to access it. So that's kind of universal. They've built a tab for information on the different types of public domain and free to use resources. So as I mentioned, there's Creative Commons. There's different kinds of Creative Commons. There's some that are available however you want to redistribute. There's some that are available to use, but they'll have this non-commercial. So if something you're selling, you can't use it. But basically, this is a way Creative Commons license allows you to use things without having to get permission, as long as you make attribution. And depending on the type of Creative Commons, you may be able to alter it, you may not be able to alter it, or not use it for commercial purposes. And there's links to Creative Commons images here. I get questions from faculty a lot about that. If they found like an image on Google or whatever their search engine, DuckDuckGo, I'll show. They ask, am I able to use this in a lecture? Am I able to put this into a PowerPoint? And this Creative Commons is a good way to be able to share those images. And there's actually a way to search images in a search engine that have that open access or Creative Commons license. And so I'll show that. If you do find material that is not Creative Commons, is not public domain, is not free to use, there's actually there's a form letter in here somewhere, I believe, like a sample. Basically, you're going to want to get in touch with whoever owns the copyright and request permission. You can do that through a phone call. You can do it through an email. If you do decide to call the owner of a piece of material that you want to request permission to use, always follow it up with an email or a letter, because you want that written record that you've been granted permission, whatever the terms were. If they charged a fee, make a record of that, and just keep a copy. Always keep a copy if you do this. That way there's no question later on about whether or not you went through and made due diligence to request that permission. The last thing I want to show is, because I've gotten questions from faculty before, say, oh, I found this image on Google, or I use DuckDuckGo sometimes, but either one. How can I be sure if I can use that in my PowerPoint? So we've already know that there's Creative Commons licenses that we can use if we make attribution. So for example, if I'm looking for X-ray images in Google, it'll pull up things all from the entire web. If you look at this at the top of the results, you'll see tools. And if you expand that, it creates these drop downs. And you'll see usage rights here. If you click on that, I can sort these results between Creative Commons licenses and commercial and other licenses. So you can still use those commercial or other licenses. There's probably going to be that's going to be a scenario where you're going to want to have to request permission from the creator or the owner of the content, and probably pay a fee to use. But everything in this Creative Commons license, we can make attribution. So once I have that turned on, all of these images are fair game. You just make attribution, you put it in your PowerPoint where you got it, probably the date you accessed it, whatever the URL is for that, and you're good. So that's kind of I get that question a lot, so this is just one way to do that. It works very similar in DuckDuckGo. So if I do X-ray, and it's going to pull up everything, but if I go up here to my categories and I go to images, again, different algorithms, just another search engine, pulling X-rays from the entire web. But if I go to settings, it's underneath settings. It's all licenses. I can look for Creative Commons images, which again, we can make attribution, public domain, which are those things that have existed from the life of the creator plus 70 years. They're no longer covered by copyright. You can actually, there's a little bit more flexibility in DuckDuck. I like DuckDuckGo. There's a little bit more flexibility here, but it's got free to share and use, free to share and use commercially. So if you are doing something commercial that you're looking to publish a book or something and you want to be able to use that, you can actually find content that's free to share and use, even if it's commercially. They're free to modify, share. That's a little bit different than just a straight Creative Commons. You can actually modify that content. And then they even have free to modify, share, and use commercially. So if you're looking for images to use, like if you're going to write a textbook or something, I would suggest using this. It's kind of cool. This is built into DuckDuckGo to find that content. So that's all I really wanted to show today. Again, the place you can find those things, if you go to the medical library page under Jerry Falwell Library Resources, you'll see copyright policy that goes to the LibGuide that what JFL built that has all this content we've shown. If you go to databases and click on course guides and textbooks, that's where I've put our fair use checklist that I got from a course I went through that was based on a checklist built at Columbia University. But it's almost identical to the one that JFL built. It's just a little bit not as specific to Liberty. So that's all I have for today. Again, thank you for joining. And of course, this recording is going to be on the LibGuide. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.